Next up, we have something really exciting. We have an exciting keynote by Meredith Owen, who heads up analytics and insights at Real Chemistry. Now, here's the thing. AI isn't coming for your job. It's coming for your workflows. So in this session, Meredith will share some practical field-tested ways and that communications pros can start using for AI today to work smarter, move faster, and future-proof their impact. And don't worry, this isn't just your generic use ChatGPT for meeting notes advice. This session digs into the real emerging edge of PR and marketing in the AI era, from optimizing brand content for machine audiences to building lightweight agents that surface insights before the next crisis hits. So let's welcome Meredith to the stage with a round of applause.
Hello. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Meredith Owen. I'm one of the leaders within our analytics practice at Real Chemistry. So I want you guys to do a bit of a visualization exercise with me today. Imagine that right now, something invisible is reading your press release. Not a human editor, not a journalist, a machine intelligence. Welcome to the new newsroom, where machines are our editors, our amplifiers, but also can be our biggest critics. So, over the next 10 minutes, I want you all to come with me on the future of communications, where we will find that those who will lead understand not only how to be fluent in human storytelling, but also in machine logic. Now, you might hear some of this and think, that's a little dystopian, cold. Let's stick to the humans and the relationships. But the fact of the matter is that some of the transformation we're seeing in terms of how people are finding information with AI is actually deeply human and driven by our desire for clarity, for meaning and connection, all of things which AI can really help us with. So we're seeing and witnessing firsthand a sea change in terms of how people are finding information. In fact, nearly 60% of searches are now zero-click, which means that people aren't searching multiple keywords, going to a number of different websites, reading multiple web pages. Instead, they're using a generative AI and getting a summary answer. So what that means is that your website, the destination, is really becoming that source material, and the interface is shifting to the AI summary. So, at the same time, we're seeing AI browsers emerging. And for those of you who have started using these, you've probably witnessed firsthand how, not only can they summarize a website, but they can navigate between links. They can also interact directly with a website on behalf of a user. And what this means for us as communicators then is that we really need to understand how to, evolve our SEO from, not just backlinks and keywords, but understanding how to really model after the type of content that these AI engines prefer, which is content that is clearly structured, that is really built more for summarization rather than just traffic. And those who are going to really win in this new AI era understand how to do both. So that brings me really to move number one, which is optimize for machines. You really here, you can think about your newsroom almost as your new signal hub. And in terms of pillars to follow and thinking about how to optimize your content, it comes down to things like visibility, relevance, freshness, recency, credibility, and correcting wrong or outdated information. Now, some of these may feel familiar. We've all done SEO before, but what's important to understand, especially for those of us who are responsible for reputation, is that the way GEO works is fundamentally different. These systems aren't just ranking your content, they're restructuring it, they're summarizing it, they're remixing it. So that actually brings me to this question for all of you. If ChatGPT wrote an article about your company or your brand today, what headline would it pick? So stop, pause, think about that for a second, because that's why move number 2 really is so important. We need to be treating AI as our most influential journalist, because your next journalist might be a generative system who is quoting you, summarizing your press release, influencing, perceptions. And similarly, we need to ensure that we're not just relying on luck, but that we are feeding these systems accurate information. And just as you would respect the preferences of a human journalist, we also need to know, what are the preferences, strengths, watch-outs of these different models. So, for example, companies like ChatGPT, Microsoft, Google, they've cemented a number of media partnerships, especially over the last year. And the media that they have these partnerships with has an influence on the type of content that they're most likely to surface. Not only do these partnerships help train these models on highly verified, high quality information, but it's another revenue stream for these news organizations. Additionally, when you think about strengths of, for example, ChatGPT versus Gemini, ChatGPT really behaves like a diligent reporter. It's really good at clearly citing its sources, whereas Gemini is incredibly adept at consuming video content because, it has direct access to YouTube and Google's real-time knowledge graph. So, that can also be in some ways a weakness for ChatGPT, especially for those who aren't using some of the premium models, where it's using a prefix data set and sometimes searching the web in real time. That's not to say Gemini is perfect. In fact, we've run a number of analyses for clients that have shown that Gemini can favor slightly less credible sources, which especially in areas like health can absolutely be a reputational risk. So, the point is, treat these models, like your top reporters and ensure you understand, their strengths and their quirks. So, speaking of, kind of that credibility in different sources, credibility in today's AI era is really under a new kind of siege. There are really kind of two compounding factors here. One is, using AI, it's incredibly easy now to create, misinformation, but also these AI models can really run with information at a speed at which more traditional sources might not be able to keep up. Recent studies have shown by 2026, 30% of your company or brand's perception is likely going to be driven by these LLM models. So we need to be monitoring them just like we're monitoring, your top media sources, for example. And a great first step to take is to do a baseline analysis and a real internal audit, not only to see where your strengths are, but where your weaknesses are, and understand, where there may be incomplete narratives or risks for misinformation, and shore up, in peacetime. And you can actually use AI as a tool in your toolkit to prepare for an AI-fueled crisis by training an internal agent on your approved messaging. Of course, humans are still absolutely critical in ensuring the accuracy and the credibility of content, but these LLMs can really help, scale at speed the distribution and personalization and customization of that content across multiple channels and multiple audiences in a compliant way. So let's talk a little bit more about AI agents. Quick show of hands, how many of you in the room today have used or created an AI agent? Clearly we have an incredible group of leaders here because I saw a number of hands, which is great. But if your hand wasn't up, I highly recommend this is a move that you make before the end of the year. I hear sometimes people refer to AI agents kind of as their digital intern, but I think a more fitting term, I like to think of mine as kind of my digital set of advisors. So, I have my editor, I have my researcher, I have my creative muse. All of these have been trained in a secure and compliant manner on our company's content, on pre-approved messaging, on previous work, for example. And then these agents can act on instructions. So, start a draft or summarize a report. You really, in technical terms, an AI agent is a customized model that has been trained on your company's data, and it can remember context, use tools, and surface data, all in real time and on demand. So why now? Why is it so important to be leveraging these AI models today? Use of AI models actually has quadrupled from Q1 of this year to Q3, with 43% of employees now reporting using AI agents in their workflows. So this really means we've kind of crossed that tipping point. These agents are real, they deliver value, and they shift the work. And that's I think the most important part of this story and how we really should be thinking about driving AI adoption from the ground up. Numerous recent studies show the extent to which not only, of course, do businesses need to embrace these agents to be competitive, but also how at a very individual level we see improvement in work quality and quality of life, frankly, and in really enabling humans to shift away from that tedious, redundant, administrative work and do more of the human creativity and relationship building, that all of us really desire and want to be doing every day. So let's talk about a little bit more about what will that agent do. There are also some recent studies that show most of in this room today are probably using agents primarily for writing and content creation. But I challenge you to think more about how your organization should be using agents for insights generation. The reason why more professionals aren't doing this, when we talk to clients, it's because they don't have a knowledge problem, they have a storage problem. It can be really challenging to get all of your internal data and information in one place, structured in a way that these agents can read it. And that's why we're actively partnering with clients to help them solve this problem so that instead of having all of this dormant research, they can put these agents in the hands of their teams who are asking questions every day like, how has our messaging shifted? Where might there be white space or narrative gaps? And that way, we're really helping address that capacity gap I think we're all feeling, where there just aren't enough hours in the day, and we can start arming our teams with answers instead of just files. So you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot, a whole other layer, a whole other channel. But the truth is, from a measurement standpoint, there are really just 3 things that you need to be keeping an eye on when it comes to AI. The first is your visibility score. So overall, at an aggregate level, how does your company and brand stand up relative to competitors on each of the models? And then, from a narrative and sentiment standpoint, how do you compare in terms of how those models are ultimately surfacing your messaging and driving perception? And finally, and perhaps the most actionable piece of information, especially in the short term for all of us, is really understanding what are those sources of information that are fueling these AI answers, and how can we as communicators lead the way, especially knowing the increased influence that things like earned and influencer strategy have in terms of what's showing up. So let's recast our to-do list. We've got optimize for machines, treat AI as your most influential journalist, develop a crisis plan that moves at machine speed, build your first agent, turn research into answers, measure what the machines think of you, and finally, and the one I want to leave you all with is lead with trust. Because as automation scales, your edge isn't going to be your fastest bot, it's going to be your strongest relationship. And so communicators who lead with human empathy, but also have mastered that machine logic, will be those who redefine visibility and reputation in the new AI era. Thank you. So want to open up for any questions, comments, did anything especially resonate with anybody? Sherry.
Meredith, I'm behind the pole. But, thank you very much for the presentation. When you're out talking to different companies, how many do you think, what's the range of maturity of what you're seeing? And what do the best look like? And Where are most people?
That's a great question. There is definitely, I think, a range in terms of where we're seeing companies and clients at today. Those who are really kind of leading the way are thinking about how to not just do this at a brand level, but really stand up enterprise level programs and initiatives to implement best practices, because it's not just about understanding how your company is showing up in AI search, but then developing the people, process, and tools around how to then take action on that. So I think right now, this is something we're talking to almost all of our clients about. It's something that definitely is top of mind, but there is definitely different levels of maturity in terms of it being interesting versus something that clients are taking action and getting the lead on today. Yeah, question over there.
Thanks for the presentation. I know there were a lot of photos and people have clearly been piqued in the interest. I'd love for you to hum a few more bars though on one of the challenges you talked about, which is a storage problem, and kind of what tips you might have, particularly knowing that communications doesn't always own all of this data and information. So how do you work not just in your own function, but across IR, across the businesses and every other function? Any tips or things that you can talk about more there?
Yeah, and I think you are spot on in the fact that one of the biggest challenges to centralizing the data can be it lives in a lot of different places with a lot of different owners. And that's where I think, it can be a never-ending task to centralize every data set you have, every insight your team has gathered, research report, example of work. And it is okay to start somewhere. So I think even just in taking the step to centralize all of the data that your team does own, that paired with the third-party sources that these LLMs have access to can already be a great starting point, and can be a proof case and a pilot to then get other teams on board to then start to cooperate and collaborate a little bit more on those efforts. It's a great question.
Hey, thank you. Great presentation. I thought you really broke it down in a way that was accessible. Listen, we've been, as an agency, been doing this for years. And my question is a little more organizational. What we've found is that we are generally sent to the SEO teams who tend to be very defensive about this new world and you can sometimes dismiss it. So knowing that this is at a higher level and honestly belongs at the CCO level, how have you approached that to bring a new appreciation?
It's, I think, such an important point, and goes to what we were talking about around, GEO isn't just about ranking. It really is a true evolution of SEO in the fact that it is perception and reputation shaping. And that's why I think all of us as communicators need to be so confident that it's critical, to your point, that we have a seat at that table. And so in terms of how to really help connect the dots between what's showing up in GEO and that communications and business impact, I think that's why doing that initial audit, showing how even what's showing up today is shaping some of those perceptions in the real world, can be the types of proof points that really demonstrate the impact of this new channel and who should be involved in the optimization of it. That's a great question.
Thank you. Do you think that automating specific workflows should be another move we should be taking, whether that's specific to our function overall or some tasks, external relations, internal relations? I know you talked about it, but you didn't position it as a move. So I'm just interested in your perspective.
Yeah, and so in terms of your question, when you say automating tasks, do you mean leveraging these agents to then really automate specific parts of your workflow? I'm going to say that actually, and this is something that even within my organization as an analytics team, that we've really internalized in just the last 6 months, but really any repetitive task, anything you're doing more than once a day should absolutely be optimized with an agent. If we can't get our teams out of that lower level work, it will be difficult to stay, competitive at the pace at which this is moving. So I think that all workflows should be evaluated for agent optimization. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lumen.
Hi.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you so much.
That was great.
Thank you.